Hey there, Newtypes. We're experimenting with a different kind of video this week and trying my hand at a deck tech for a deck I've been having consistent results with and have the confidence to share in depth. We'll cover the deck list I'm running with, what I consider the core of the build, how I play certain things and why, the optional cards to build around that core, and finally, some real quick tactics, tips, and tricks for piloting the list. I'd like to be clear that I'm just having fun with the Gundam trading card game, and while I'm seeing success, nothing I say is gospel, nor should it be taken as such. I'm not a coach, but I'd like to offer my insights to anyone who may benefit from them. That being said, if you like what you're seeing here, please give the video a like and the channel a subscription. Feel free to leave me any feedback, questions, or just some banter below in the comments, and even if you're roasting me, I still love to read every single one, and I will do my very best to reply to them as well. Shout out to the community of players both online and in person that have allowed me and encouraged me to continue doing what I'm doing. We're a small channel here and we're having fun, but every view, every like, every subscription, and all the comments make it all worth it. I'd also like to give a shout out to Coach SK for being an inspiration to the build, as well as being a fantastic creator in the community. Not only has he shown this channel and other channels tremendous support, but he's a wealth of knowledge that you can definitely gain from. If you want to check him out, his channel, as well as others, will be in the description below. Please give them a look, and I promise you won't regret it. Now, I think it's time to get this yap session started. Alright, so starting this off, here is the deck list I'm currently running and used to secure my invite. First obvious thing here is that it does not use Kira or any of the strikes. It also doesn't make use of Wufei, despite having the Altron in the list. The core concept of this is to be consistent and steady. There is a lot of redundancy across the levels, and hitting a consistent curve really is this deck's bread and butter. It's not in a rush to hit level 8, but it threatens it really well, and coupling that with a lot of cards and costs that allow you to play multiple units and cards per turn, it forces your opponents to make reads and risks. This is the core of the deck, 34 cards which allow you 16 cards that I consider flexible slots to help you tune the list to the meta you are expecting to encounter. So let's start with the blockers. Lefrith is an automatic 4 of, and while you need more in this part of the curve, the numbers and units will shift depending on needs and preference. You can go up to 8 additional units that might fill this space, particularly flats and Rigdius. Silver Bullet is insanely good in the current meta, providing a cost-effective blocker at level 5, as well as being one of your most effective tools for common decks you'll face in the current meta. Anything that has ping as part of its game plan, and even the wing mirror, will have this card be something annoying to play around. People play around with the number here, but I think it is a non-negotiable 4 of. The wings, the Wing Gundam and wingzero, I think are very self-explanatory. It's the namesake of the deck. And while I've seen people play around with the numbers for both, going as low as 2, they really are your strongest tools, and you will almost always want to see multiple of them. Enough that even if they clutter your hand early game, it's worth the risk, especially with overflowing affection to help sort out any clogs. The graceful demeanors are as a minimum 2 right now, and I think any deck with white that has a game plan that closes out after level 8, you need them as minimum 2, if not more. If you need to hold it until the end of the game, there should be chances to make use of it. If you have it burst early, you're almost guaranteed to get fantastic value out of it. It is also a card that can mess up combat math in the early turns when you bounce something that they don't expect you to. It's kind of a bit of a mind game card sometimes. When you're trying to eke out as much value as you can with your blocks and trading up into units of your choosing, a card like Graceful Demeanor that allows you combat tricks at weird times to throw your opponent off is actually really, really invaluable. Overflowing Affection is not a card that's an automatic 4 of, but it is a card that you definitely want to have in your build in some number. I think 2 is the right number, minimum. If not 3 to 4 where you can fit them. They help sort out poor hands, and being able to dig 2 cards deep to get an important piece for 1 cost is pretty important and gets better the later you use it in the game. During those times, you usually require more specific pieces to play your most optimal game, and being able to do that without necessarily sacrificing your curve is really, really strong. Peace Million is a minimum 2 of. You will see people now running 4 in decks as well, and that's because of how much value it brings to the table when you're actively in control of the board to close the game out. Hero and Duo, these numbers here I think are important, and you might see people argue to cut Hero to 3 or Duo to 3, but Hero is a massive stat stick, and Duo pairs with a lot of units in the deck beyond Death Scythe that you'll see later. You'll likely be pairing him more liberally than you'd expect, and knowing you have the full suite of duos to draw into or burst allows you to make plays that aren't reliant on the Death Scythe link alone or the Heavy Arms link alone. So having that little bit of confidence definitely will help, especially if you're running cards like Path to Victory or Defeat. Move into the pairings here, and as I mentioned, Duo is going to be the main feature for this part of it. His 2 main units that you are going to be pairing him on are the Death Scythe and the Silver Bullet. The Death Scythe is pretty self-explanatory. You're using him ideally on your level 6 turn to get yourself ready for threatening the wingzero. And also, the first strike generally helps you clear the board. A lot of the times you can catch a Gundam with an Amuro off guard. You can hit some things like the Banshee Norn after it's taking some damage. Its first strike is very, very good right now, and the fact that Duo on Death Scythe also can't have its AP reduced is by something like the Norn is really, really good. Now, the Silver Bullet, I think, is something to highlight here. Putting Duo on the Silver Bullet gives you a 5/6 that can't be pinged down, and I think that's really important to know because 5/6 is a pretty big body, and at the state of the game, say you're level 5, you can usually get some pretty big trades with this card. And if you happen to have another blocker, it actually makes resource management for your opponent a lot more difficult, as well as decision making for their swings. You can typically get 3 to 4 cards off of Silver Bullet as a 4/6, or sorry, a 5/6. And one of the plays that you can definitely get is putting a Silver Bullet down, blocking something, having it have some HP up, put Duo on it, swing into another thing, and then they're almost never going to have enough ping damage to do anything other than trade a unit into your Silver Bullet, which is generally fantastic. The other cards here are ones you don't really want to play Duo on unless you absolutely have to, particularly the Lefrith and Flat. Those cards are great if you're in an aggro matchup and you know you're going to be facing a lot of 2/2s. The 3/6 body does help a lot, and if you happen to get that out maybe on a turn, your turn 4 with your EX base, where you go Lefrith or Flat, and then you have your Duo in hand, and you have now a 2/4 from the turn before and a 3/6 up, you generally have something that can't be Gundam Amuroed, which is also nice. The Heavy Arms is another one that you're actually not really needing Duo on, and it's really one of those cards that you put Duo on if you know you're kind of the beatdown. And that's usually in the blocker matchups when you are facing something like a Lefrith on board or a Rick Diaz and you just want to swing through to break that base and start getting in there. It's not your most optimal use of it. Honestly, Heavy Arms is probably the best on Hero as a 6/6. However, it does give you the option, and that's, it's nice to have and nice to know when you should play it. The Altron is one that I actually think is maybe a third one that you'll consider using, because Duo on the Altron is a 6/8. Now, a lot of the times when you're playing Altron out, you're not really doing much more than pushing the Avalanche forward. So being able to put Duo on the Altron gives you something pretty big to swing at opponents and threaten them really good. It's even better when you have things like the Unforeseen Incident in your back pocket. It makes the Altron with Duo on it an absolute menace for your opponent. Likewise, The Wing Gundam becomes a 5/7, and that's pretty good. It's no Heero Wing Gundam, obviously, but it's an alternative, and it does make very good use out of Peace Million. Moving on to Heero, and he comes after Duo because honestly, his pairings are super straightforward, but they're also um, a little more flexible, if that makes sense. Wing Gundam is your obviously your very best pairing here, in my opinion, more than wingzero. Wingzero is a 5/7 on its own, and generally the only time you're putting Heero onto your wingzero is if you are protecting it from something like maybe a Neo Zeong. Otherwise, the Wing Gundam plus Heero is kind of Hero's best pair possible. It's a 7/7, got the breach, and with Peace Million, this thing can live forever. The Heavy Arms is another really good one. It's a 6/6, and the reason Heavy Arms was in the deck in the first place was to take care of your 5/5 threats, like the Gundam Amuro or the Victory Gundam with Uso. He's pretty strong with those two, but then the other one that honestly catches people off guard is putting him on the flat or the Lafrith. Making yourself have a 4/5 blocker before turn 5 is pretty strong. It makes a lot of trades difficult early on, and it makes some things similar to the Silver Bullet either force your opponent to put in more ping than they want or put more bodies than they want into that. Now, the Death Scythe is another obvious one. You really don't want to use Heero on Death Scythe unless you have to. It does come up. There's times where you'll put a Death Scythe or a pair of Death Scythe down. Your opponent will play a card thinking you don't have a duo or a pilot, and they'll make a swing or they'll swing a blocker into something. You'll take the shield hit or something like that, and then you'll be able to put Heero on the Death Scythe, and it will be a first strike. A 7/5 first strike is nothing to sneeze at. It's still not the best. I still think you probably want to save Heero for other things, but it's always on the table, and that's never a bad thing. The Altron is another one that I don't think you necessarily need Heero on. It makes it a 7/7. That's okay, but at that point, honestly, I feel like the Altron may as well just not have a body on it. It's a threat on its own, and generally a pilot on top of it isn't really pushing it over the edge of survivability. Again, Peace Million kind of changes that. It makes Duo really good on it. It also makes Heero pretty solid on it, but it is less of a thing than you would imagine it, because people are going to more willingly trade multiple units into this card, and they were going to do that no matter what in the first place. So the value isn't always there. Now, the Silver Bullet, a 6/5 blocker, is pretty good, especially when it can't be pinged. So having a 6/5 with a, more frail HP body compared to a 5/6 with Duo on it is still relevant because that 6 power makes it trade up incredibly well. That being said, it's not really your optimal use of the Silver Bullet, and 5 AP is more or less where you're going to have your best interactions. Of course, this deck, or my build at least, runs the Unforeseen Incident, and that does help things a lot. It lets you soak up a lot more. It lets you send the Silver Bullet as a 6/5 into something bigger and not trade a lot of the times, and that's pretty good. Here are the optional cards that I think are worth highlighting. Obviously, there's going to be more than that, but I think these are the big ones, and I'll give you a quick breakdown of why. The Shenlong and Wu Fei, I don't really like them. I don't think Wu Fei is very good right now. I think that things that you are going to put him on that you can breach aren't really going to be there. Most of the time, it's just not happening. And the fact that Shenlong is a level 5 that does not benefit from Peace Million makes it pretty unworthy of the slot, in my opinion. You will never want to play it on your level 5 with an EX. because Wu Fei eating that EX to be linked with it sets you back. It doesn't usually help. Your clapback responses from your opponents usually hurt. It's susceptible to burn, and the trades aren't really there. The high value isn't really as high value as people think. If you get the chance to swing into something, eat it, and then kill a blocker, absolutely. But I think this is a card that you have to know you're going to be playing into a heavier blocker meta before you even consider it. Wu Fei, on the other hand, is something you consider, especially if you are expecting some blockers, but not a ton. Putting Wu Fei on the Wing Gundam onto the Altron are always going to be very good for you, and it does change the dynamics of the deck a little. Now, the Death Scythe. This one I like because it's an efficient unit. It is a 4/3 with repair, and if you put Duo on it, that is a 5/5, and it only costs 2 at level 4. This card can wreak havoc on the right deck, especially with that repair one. It makes it a very, very strong card to take things out early, and it makes generally your opponent have to put in more than one card to take it out if you're doing it right. So you can almost always trade up in terms of cards for it. Your one Death Scythe might get you +2 cards off of your opponent's side of the field, and that's pretty good for control. It also has a very solid stat line as a Forge 3. It lets you push past Lefriths, and that repair 1 helps that again, so it makes that block a lot worse for them. Now we'll go into the Recedes Meganak. This one I think is a tech card, and I think it gets a lot better when you're running something like Shenlong and Wu Fei for sure. It definitely changes your tone of the deck, and you shift into a mid-range deck that maybe that's the type of deck that you will cut down your wing zeros because you are taking enough control early on that they're just not that useful. But the ability to attack a standing unit with your green unit is pretty strong. And it lets your Shenlong have a second life if your opponent isn't ready for it. No one expects Receipt Meganak right now. That card is pretty strong. It also allows you to play that down and hit someone's with your wing zero, and that's pretty crazy. It also actually helps you do that with the Death Scythe, so not a card to ignore if you can. The Rick Diaz here, very much like the Gundam Death Scythe, has the stat line to help you be aggressive, and Wing is a list that you are switching between being the beatdown and being the control at a couple given times in the battle. And against different matchups, sometimes that will shift to only being control, but having the flexibility, especially when you're going to likely be running 8 level 3 2-cost blockers, does help. I mentioned Coach SK at the beginning of the video, and he's someone who uses both the Death Scythe and the Rick Diaz because he plays Wing in a more beatdown oriented deck. I play it in a more flexible way, but his style is very effective, and I think it is another way to play Wing, especially if that's your gameplay style. Rick Diaz allows you to trade up with Rizels and the Messer. For me, I don't usually mind letting them through if I can. That's just personal preference. It's my playstyle. So I'm not worried about trading even 2 Lefriths or something for a Rizel or a Messer. I know it's not optimal, it's not great, but it's something I'm willing to do every now and then, especially if I have something like an unforeseen incident. I will make use of that when I can. And I have other cards in the deck that, people typically don't see, such as the Gundam Heavy Arms. And because I'm running, 7 level 3 2-cost blockers and 2 graceful demeanors, I do feel like I have that leeway. The Ale Strike Gundam, definitely still a consideration. I don't like this card in Wing because unless you're playing first, in order to get value before risking it being eaten, you'd be level 6 and you have to put a pilot on it. I don't like putting pilots on the Ale Strike unless it's Kira. because I don't feel like they get a ton of value. I never want to put a Heero on an Ale Strike. I never want to put a Duo on an Ale Strike, really. I feel like Duo wants to always be on the Death Scythe or the Silver Bullet. Heero almost always wants to be on another unit as well. And if you're running Wu Fei, you can put him on there, but again, Wu Fei also has other targets that you'd rather hold them, and sometimes I think removing the temptation is good. That being said, bouncing is pretty powerful, and we are in a format where there's a lot of strong tokens, striker packs, Corsica bases, even victory leg tokens, right? All very strong, all very useful, and sometimes just having the ability to Ale Strike bounce them will be good. Ale Strike bounce, if you ever get it off on the turn after you've blocked something, and then you can trade up, is also always good. So it's hard to argue that Ale Strike doesn't have value, but for me, I don't think it's necessarily the right thing, and I do think you need to build the deck in a way that allows you to do that better. And I do think, those decks that have something like 3 unforeseen incidents or maybe some lower level blockers like Zawart to help get you to that point where you can take that extra turn off to get Ale Strike with a unit down or play Ale Strike, protect it, and then the follow-up turn play a pilot on it. Definitely something you, speaking of like support for that, you got the Striker pack. And I think if you are playing in a hyper aggro meta, Striker pack definitely helps a lot. I think Striker pack in a hyper aggro meta or a more aggro meta is better than unforeseen. So if you're expecting a ton of Blurple, if you're expecting a ton of 1-year war, I think Striker pack is going to help you more often than not, only because of the chance of a burst being more useful. The Witch and the Bride, I think, is a more interesting option than the Ale Strike Gundam. And mostly because the utility of being able to bounce something in that level 5, right? I think Ale Strike is a little restricted, and also the fact that you need a pilot to get its effect off makes it a little bit less economic. Witch and the Bride is just a card for a card. I will take that tempo. I don't feel bad. It's why I like Graceful Demeanor, because the ability to potentially get 2 cards versus, for your 1 is up there. And you are trying to get incremental value where you can. The Witch and the Bride, being what it is, allows you to not only burst it and bounce something to maybe save another shield, but it does allow you some unique combat tricks that you wouldn't otherwise get with the Ale Strike Gundam. And level 5 units aren't unheard of right now. And also, the ability to hit tokens again is, this is the part of the video where we go into the tactics, tips, and advice for the deck. And this is, I guess, not an in-depth way to look at it, but it's my tips mostly for the deck. I'll start with the tactics part and the real bread and butter line of this deck. Because you're playing towards that really effectively, you're trying to get to your level 5 or level 6 turn with an EX, right? Playing a line where you're able to go Lefrith with First Contact or Silver Bullet with flat Lefrith, or Silver Bullet and First Contact is another pseudo duo. Your level 6 turn is the turn where you can most afford to hit that curve that threatens wingzero. And the mindset of most people when they're threatened with a wingzero is to either go fast and hope you don't have it, or play at a tempo that usually favors you. If you are able to get to a point where you can set your board up and make your favorable trades and eventually manipulate your opponent into getting to a point where you can go wingzero, that's how your deck snowballs. That's how you get to these points where you've managed to seize absolute control. But it also allows you to kind of hold cards back if you need to. It allows you to be frugal with your wingzeros. That's why I like having 4, because sometimes you'll get to 8, your opponent will start holding back, you'll play wingzero, then they'll drop down some more cards and you can wingzero again. Or you can duo Death Scythe, First Strike something, and continue to maintain the board until you need to wingzero again. The next thing is your EX resource. I can't tell you how to manage this other than the fact that you do need to understand when to use it and when to hold it back, so you can either bluff a wingzero, or you have the option to play your double line, right? Like if you can get to level 6 with 5 regular resources and an EX up, and you're able to go Lefrith Silver Bullet, you're probably going to get to your level 8 a lot easier, and also force your opponent to go wider. It's hard to say exactly the type of circumstances, right? Because it will change, but your EX resource is not something you necessarily want to even spend on an overflowing affection or to get another blocker out. Sometimes you need to weigh whether or not you're stopping a shield, eating a unit, or just taking the damage, losing the base, losing the shield, losing the unit, and holding that EX resource so your opponent can either potentially commit a mistake or commit more to the board so you can wing zero. Likewise, where if you're deciding on a flat or a silver bullet at level 4 or 5, rather, sometimes you're just playing the silver bullet out and hoping they don't have an Amuro. But if you suspect they have an Amuro, honestly, throw out the flat, throw out the Lefrith, let them use the Amuro and let them bait it, because sometimes your perceived misplays are just buying you time. Sometimes it's just a tempo play. Sometimes you're going to get that silver bullet out there, your level 7 turn, or you're setting up for that silver bullet first contact level 6, and your opponent now has to deal with your silver bullet blocking their Gundam, them, and then they're being unable to survive the wing zero, right? The next thing is identifying early on whether you're the beatdown or control in your matchup is probably the biggest thing for wing, especially Operation Meteor, as I'm calling this version of the deck. You need to know if you need to be aggressive. You need to know if playing your link on the card that you probably, or your pair on the card that you probably shouldn't, is going to get you there. Like the Heero on the flat on the Lefrith play that people don't expect, and you just break that EX base early on, and now you have a 4/5 blocker they have to decide how to deal with, is part of it. You do need to know when to make that decision, and sometimes it's not always the right decision, and that's part of the gamble. But ideally, you need to know if you're beat down or control by your level 5 turn, because that will often dictate what type of lines you're going to be taking for your 6, 7, and 8 turns, especially how you're going to set up your wing zero and whether or not you're bluffing your wing zero. Because the more aggressive you are, obviously, the less cards you're going to have in your hand, and at some point you're going to have to pull back or you're going to have to commit. And that can be pretty deadly. However, that leads me to my next point with be bold. Be bold. Your opponent is going to identify your deck fairly early. You're not really being sneaky by not playing Overflowing Affection and revealing your second color. Very often, they see your white blocker, they're going to assume either blue-white or white-purple, anything with white, and it's still going to be blockers. You have a blocker, they've seen a blocker, they're going to play against you like you have blockers. That doesn't really change their mentality against how they play against wing. Sometimes baiting them into trying to play more aggressive when they don't have an optimal hand is also important, because it allows you to get to those nut draw turns where you are just forcing out the wing early and they've committed early. So, Overflowing Affection is a card that you're going to have to learn to hold or play early, but don't be scared about playing it early. I think that the people who are like, oh, I never really want to play it on my turn level 2, sometimes you do, sometimes you have to, but I don't think that you should necessarily be scared about fixing your hand if it's in there. Or it's also about not just the Overflowing Affection, but being bold enough to make the decision to put a pilot on something that it shouldn't normally be on, like your flat or your Lefrith. And for me, that's also been part of the learning curve, because I do have cards, obviously, that I don't want to pair them or put things on unless I absolutely have to. And that is part of your decision-making process. At some point, you are only ever playing to your outs, and sometimes your outs aren't very good. So if playing to your outs are the choice between a bad situation and playing a card or just holding your card, being bold can just be playing nothing on your turn, right? And that's really, really, really important to remember, that being bold doesn't mean play efficiently every turn. Sometimes you need to make the inefficient play. You need to make that play that goes, well, why didn't you play anything? Because sometimes that actually will throw your opponent off. They might not know what you're getting up to, And it's on them to decide, oh, do you have something or are you holding it back for another play? And yes, sometimes it's a gamble, but that's part of being bold. Sometimes you have to make those gambles. That's part of I wouldn't say necessarily a skill set so much as if you're not necessarily playing on the railroad tracks your opponent expects you to be playing, you will have an advantage because they're now playing your game. And a lot of tempo and these type of decks is about making your opponent play your game so they can make the mistakes so you can punish them. But I think that's it now. That's probably all that needs to be said about this deck. If you have any questions, do leave me a comment below. Let me know if I missed anything that you feel like I should cover, and maybe I'll do a follow-up video, or I'll just answer you in the comments. But for now, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.